Okay, so it's recording now. Okay. Hi, I'm Trenton Peters, and we are doing the presentation for group discussion number 1, which is titled, what is it called? Universality of Laws. So the prompt is based on what you know about the universality of the laws of physics and chemistry. Do you think that it's likely that there are also universal laws of biology? Defend your position. So I'll be taking the affirmative. I will be saying, yes, there are, or at least likely will be laws of biology that are universal. And then Holley will be taking the negative position. I'll let her introduce herself now.
Hello, my name is Holley, and I am playing the devil's advocate today.
Okay, perfect. So, the universal laws of biology would be, I think, what's called replication. So in 1976, Richard Dawkins wrote a book called The Selfish Gene, which is super influential and famous. And I'm just going to read a quote here from him. It's finally time to return to the problem which we started, to the tension between individual organism and gene as rival candidates for the central role in natural selection. One way of sorting this whole matter out is to use the terms replicator and vehicle. The fundamental units of natural selection, the basic things that you survive or fail to survive, that form lineages of identical copies with occasional random mutations, are called replicators. DNA molecules are replicators. They generally, for reasons that we shall come to, gang together in large communal survival machines or vehicles. So that's a quote from The Selfish Gene, page 253 in the anniversary edition. So Dawkins states that DNA is a kind of replicator, and further on in the book he supposes that the replicator would be necessary for life on other planets as well, even though the conditions that constrained the nature of life on this planet would be different than others. They would require a method of perpetuating itself or life through time, or it would simply exist until it died in a single generation. This would probably be just a very basic nucleic acid or something like that. I say very basic, but those are actually pretty complicated chemicals and molecules. So I think that the universal law, at least one universal law of biology across all planets, would be replicators. They would need to consist of something like RNA or DNA. And there's another article that I found on extremetech.com. The title is called "Researchers Find More Than 1 Million Alternatives to DNA." DNA is made out of deoxyribonucleic acid, and then RNA is just ribonucleic acid. That's what gave rise to life on Earth. But a team of biologists used a computer simulation to explore so-called chemical space within certain constraints. To choose the constraints, the team had to distill what makes nucleic acid molecules distinct. They settled on organic molecules that can assemble into a nuclear polymer, linear polymer, with at least 2 attachment points, plus a place for nitrogen bases to connect. The substructure of the molecule also needs to be stable in a polymer configuration. Since these molecules don't contain traditional sugars and phosphorus, you can't call them DNA. They're some other kind of nucleic acid with potentially similar properties. So the analysis points to more than 1.16 million potential nucleic acid molecules. That number exceeded even the most extreme estimates beforehand. So it's likely that those would be what consists life on other planets. And that's why I think that there would be universal laws, and I tried to identify at least one.
So I would say to that I think that the idea that there are laws of biology are not true. I believe that life is circumstantial, that because these different like plants, animals, and insects, they need different things to live. And you know, with all of those, you need oxygen, food, water, and light. But I would say that we do need those things, but those things are already there. So maybe it's just a circumstance of where we are. And I would also say that I don't think we can say that there are universal laws of biology because we haven't discovered other life in this universe. So I feel like it would be kind of a educated guess just to say so. And I feel like if we did find life somewhere else or on a different planet, that maybe that would change things or create a different narrative. But because we haven't, I would say that there are no laws of universal biology.
So in response to that, I would say that it would be circumstantial on what planet you're choosing to analyze. What kind of life would be on Europa or another planet. That would be dependent on the physics of the gravity that pulls on the life forms. It'd be dependent on the chemical structure of the atmosphere. It would be dependent on which molecules were abundant enough to give rise to life and sustain life, which would not be necessarily oxygen, water, or carbon on another planet. But I would say that the relationship of those circumstances to the kinds of lives that arise would be universal laws. So they're not necessarily the circumstances or the life forms the way that they are, but maybe the relationship between the abundancy of the molecules and what kind of life arises. Maybe you'd have to have a sufficient threshold of, you need at least this much of this kind of chemical to give rise to life. And I think that would be a universal law. Also, another universal law was metabolic scaling, which means that there is a certain amount of fuel necessary to sustain life. So however they get fuel, for us it's calories. It might be a different way for different life forms, but the relationship of the fuel source to their metabolism would be determined by a kind of law. An example of this on Earth is like, I think an example I heard, what's his name? Robert Sapolsky. He's a neuroendocrinologist at Stanford. He was talking about this concept, and I think the organism he used as an example was I think it was a snail, but like the curvature, the size of the shell in relationship to the organism inside we could predict it without observing that specific species. So we could observe one kind of snail and then extrapolate to all others based on the relationship between the snail to its shell. So I think that there still would be universal laws, and probably lots more than I'm talking about.
I like what you said, but I will stay and hold on the fact that because we haven't found life elsewhere, I can safely say that we have no idea if there are universal laws of biology.
Yeah, I have something to respond to that too. I could say that there are stars and planets that we haven't discovered yet, but we know enough about stars and planets, how they form, what's possible for them to be consisted of, and how they relate to each other, that we could say that even though we haven't never observed this particular star, we could say that it did originate in a stellar nebula that coalesced, started to spin very slowly, and then the electrostatic forces of those elements together as they start to spin make them coalesce, and then they start to spin even faster, and then they aggregate so much mass that they start to, gravity becomes so large that all of the other gas in the area starts to form a sphere. I think that we could say that that's true of all stars, even if the ones that we haven't observed. Just like we could say the same thing about biology. Like, just because we don't know specifically what the life form looks like, we know enough about how life originated on Earth. We have so many various samples on Earth that we could say that the relationship of the circumstances to the organisms that live here would be consistent throughout the universe. I think, did you want to say anything else to that?
I'm good. I can't knock you down.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that's it. Thank you for your time.